answers the phone.
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and
Give me your
get
phone
started.
number again.
I'm going to put everybody on mute for just a minute.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, and I have to let Lynda out because we need to hear her. But what I wanted to say, this is Debbie Hockman with the David Posnack JCC, and I'm welcoming you again to our wonderful monthly program with the Friends of the Sterling Road Library, where the lovely Lynda Levin discusses a book that hopefully all of you have read. And this was really an interesting choice this month. This was obviously the big read by the Broward County Library. It is definitely out of our typical type of read, but we're glad that you did read it. And if you didn't read it, we're glad you're with us either way, because we just love to have this every month. And this book, though, we think will have a lot of interesting discussions. So I put you all on mute right now, just so that we don't have the background noise. But when you want to speak, just go ahead and unmute yourself. You guys have been doing a fabulous job the last couple months of really being courteous to each other and letting each other speak when you need to. And we do actually have a smaller group today, so it may even be a little bit easier. But just remember that if you leave your speaker on, we really can hear everything, which means the crinkling of paper or the eating or anything else going on in your background. And sometimes that can be distracting. So if you're not speaking and can keep it on mute, that just is kind of a great thing for everybody. It just makes it a good experience. So with all of that being said, I'm gonna turn it over to Lynda.
Great. All righty. Thanks, Deb. So I'm so glad to see everybody. Look forward to this every single month, seeing all of you. Today, first of all, our upcoming books, you do have that list for you. I want to tell you the Book of Lost Friends by Lisa Wingate coming up next month. Anybody read it yet? Did you enjoy it? I really enjoyed it. Yes.
I do also want to tell you that the registrations are up on the JCC website. I don't think they changed the March book yet, Lynda. Okay. But the March book that's listed here, which is The Henna Artist by Alka Joshi, is the correct book. So I'm going to say to you, if you're going to register on the JCC website, just skip March for now, because let's get it to be the right book online. Just wanted to put that in there.
Great. But so you'll know that one is The Henna Artist, and you're going to enjoy that one as well. April, Pride and Prejudice. May, Sparks Like Stars. Okay, so we've got a good lineup for you. So today, we are reading this book that was quite different for us. And I was laughing when you guys, before some of you came on, we were laughing and saying, we are the diehards, that most of us that have read this book. A lot of people bailed today. They didn't enjoy reading the graphic novel as much. But I want to tell you something, these graphic novels, just to give you a little background, it has gained so much popularity. In fact, in 2020, the Newbery Award for Children was first given to the first graphic novel. It was called The New Kid by a guy by the name of Jerry Craft. And it shows you just how, how accepted these books really are at this time. As of 2018, over $1 billion in sales had been grossed by graphic novels. They are focusing now on a wide range of subjects. There's more and more graphic novels about women and girls, people of color, the LGBTQ experience, lots of nonfiction as well as fiction. These graphic novels have done a great job in introducing classics to a whole new generation of readers. Kids that never would have picked up classics before are now reading them because they're in graphic format. Graphic novels are said to be able to improve children's reading, especially if they're reluctant readers. By the way, that's a whole other conversation. When I got into looking at that, there were a lot of pros and cons, but a lot of pros. A lot of people believe that it really is very, very helpful to these kids to be reading graphic novels. It's interesting, just a little bit as a means of background. I didn't realize this, but comic strips actually began in the late 19th century. It seems that the first one was called The Yellow Kid. It was in 1895. It showed up in the United States. In Europe, they had The Adventures of Tintin in 1928. In the late 1930s was all of a sudden the arrival of the superheroes. In the 1940s, they had the release of the Archie comics and Peanuts. In 1978, that was the time when the term graphic novel came into popular usage. And it started with a book called A Contract with God, which was written by Will Eisner. And you're going to hear that name again because the Eisner Award is the most prestigious award you can receive as an author of illustrated novels, of graphic novels. And you're going to see that our author today has won that Eisner Award. So it's named after this author who wrote the very well-known graphic novel. That the first time it was actually called a graphic novel, A Contract with God. In the 1980s, there were 3 more serious adult comics that came out. And the one I want to mention to you is called Maus, M-A-U-S. And it was a book by Art Spiegelman, and it was a book about the Holocaust. And it was, of course, a very serious book. It won the Pulitzer Prize in 1991. And the format, of course, it was a graphic novel. And we're going to see when we hear the background now of our author today, she was very much influenced by Art Spiegelman's book, Maus. Okay? Let me tell you a little bit about our author today. Her name is Thi Bui, and she, of course, it's very good because she explains how to pronounce her name when you listen to her interviews. She was born in Saigon in 1975, shortly before the end of the Vietnam War. And when she was 3 years old, she and her family escaped. They went to a refugee camp in Malaysia and then on to the United States. And she grew up in California. She went on to study art and law as an undergraduate at UC Berkeley. She trained as a sculptor in New York and received an MFA from Bard College. Ultimately, she decided no, she wanted to become a public school teacher. And so she began to study art education at New York University. And it was for a project there that she decided she would now look at her parents' lives in Vietnam. She would make that into a project. And she thought to herself that comics would be an appropriate medium for telling their story. And it was at that time that she learned to draw. She had never drawn a comic before, but she learned how to do it. It took her over 10 years between learning how to do the comics and also exploring this family history with her very, at first, unwilling parents. At the same time, she was teaching high school art in New York, and later she went on to Oakland, California, and she began teaching in an alternative school for recent immigrants. And it's interesting because there she was teaching them to write graphic novels, and she actually published their work in an anthology. Since 2015, she has been teaching graduate students in comics at the California College of Arts. In 2017, she published her book, The Best We Could Do, and it received amazing acclaim. It won the American Book Award. It was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award in autobiography. She won that Eisner Award, which I told you about is like the most prestigious prize you can win in comics. And her book has been selected as mandatory reading for first-year students in at least a dozen universities and colleges around the United States. She's been an illustrator for children's books by Vietnamese authors. And so she's illustrated a book called A Different Pond, also Chicken of the Sea. She's written a lot of political cartoons. If you're interested, you can see them on a website called The Nib. You can also see interviews with her on YouTube, and she's speaking at a lot of college campuses. And now, since the book is so successful, she's very much a popular speaker. And again, you can see her on YouTube. So I took the opportunity to listen to many of these interviews, and I learned that she is currently involved in a lot of different immigration issues. One that's very dear to her heart is the aid for incarcerated immigrants. What's interesting too is that she is now working on a book to talk about these incarcerated immigrants. It's about the deportation of Southeast Asians. A lot of them that were incarcerated for very minor offenses, but as soon as they're arrested, they serve their time, and then the next thing you know is they are deported, and that is very disturbing to her. And she's now going to be writing an entire book about this thing that she's so concerned about. She's got a future project. She's very interested in climate change, and she wants to document climate change as it's going to be affecting the farmers in South Vietnam. What's interesting about her, this book, in terms of summary, she interweaves the story of Vui's family in Vietnam with that of the country's history during this 20th century, and particularly during that 1955 to 1975 civil war between the communist North and the American-backed South, which is called here, we've always called it the Vietnam War, and of course there, what do they call it? The American War. But what we see, even though she does a lot of history and she gives us all kinds of historical timelines and she's referring to these historical events, this book is more than just a history lesson. It is, in fact, the story of a family. It has far-reaching impact. And what you see is that this is a story of the aftermath and how it affects the people in the midst of this war. She explores the anguish of immigration, the lasting effects of displacement, the effects that it has on a child and the entire family. She's now a first-time mother, and she comes to discover what it means to be a parent in this book, the endless sacrifices and the depths of unspoken love. Just to refresh your memory, let's talk about the characters. We've got T, right, herself. We've got her sisters, Lan and Bic. And we've got her younger brother, Tam, who's the one who was born in the Malaysian refugee camp. She's got her parents, Ma and Bo. And the author has, in the course of the story, we see that she has a lot of reasons why she wrote this book. But one that she articulates is that she wanted to find her own identity and understand the, quote, gray stillness. I thought that was a powerful way of wording it, that has always lurked in the background of her family. She says it was her goal to bring together the personal, the political, and the historical in the telling of her story. So, a bit of background, and now it's your turn. So I'm anxious to hear what you have to think, what you have to say. So first of all, why do you think, and you should know this book not only was chosen as the big read here in Broward County, but it was also in Los Angeles, and when I looked it up, in a lot of different places, libraries have chosen this book to be their big read, their community read. So why? Why do you think we chose it in Broward County? Why do you think they chose it?
I think that we have a lot of immigrant population all over the United States, particularly in Broward County, and I think this is a great read for that, so that maybe we try to look at other people's backgrounds. And I also think it was a great way to do it because art really is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah. That they kept coming to me, that expression, right? A picture is worth 1,000 words. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? I think what she says is that she really wants to shine a light on the past, to let us remember that immigration problems are not new. This was something that has gone on, and it certainly went on in Vietnam. And what she wants us to do is to sort of shine a light on that past so it can help us and guide us through this present.
Lynda, Stephanie had written a comment,
Sure.
which goes with what you're saying, because she said that the story was powerful, but she felt that the graphic form diminished that for her.
Ah, so that's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in that. I was going to ask you guys, for most of you, did it help you? Did it distract, or did it add something, the illustrations? Stephanie, I'm glad to hear you say that. Follow up on that, if you will. Any thoughts on that? Anybody who
Yes,
yeah,
to me,
go ahead.
to me, it did enhance. And I went back and I looked at some of the images. I wanted to go back and start from the beginning and just look at the images. And I didn't get the whole book done that way, but I definitely thought it enhanced. And I thought that for me, it enhanced in communicating the emotional state of the characters and the feelings of the characters.
Interesting. How many of you how many of you looked at the images first versus reading the text first, or did it together?
Jackie just wrote that she thought it was exciting and different, and that some of the pages had few words, but it told, and she put that all in caps, told the story. So I think that was like you encapsulated that, Jackie, with that one comment.
Right.
I agree with Kathy. I liked the pictures, and Jackie. I felt it made it easier to read some like a topic like this. I didn't like the back and forth. I wish she had like a list of who's who, like all the names. I found that a little confusing. But I did enjoy I did find that the pictures showed the emotions where you
Yeah.
don't really get that with just words. So I thought that was important for this book.
Or
Lynda,
it takes many,
I
many
think
words
so.
to
Hi,
denote that
can
kind
you-
of
can you hear
emotion.
me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that for me, the confusion element was very, very prevalent. I do think words have tremendous power to evoke mental pictures and images. So for myself, I did not need the picture to tell me. The words that she was writing was so powerful in what she was describing, her descriptive, in the descriptive nature of it. And I honestly found that the little cloud word things were just too confusing. And I almost missed the element of being able to be absorbed just by the words.
I agree with Stephanie. I found it, I just found it didn't make an easy read for me. I found it, again, like a powerful story, but the graphic form did diminish it for me too.
but then we also had a comment, and I'm going to say the name wrong, so I apologize, but I think it's Anushka. And she said that, thank you for bringing the book to our attention, that she had been put off by the visual element, but then loved it. And she thought it was so powerful because the contrast between the almost monochromatic shades, it eventually won her over. So I think that also like it is one of those books where, sometimes we talk about books, like you have to read 100 pages before you're into the book. But this book, I think it's more like you have to really embrace the difference of reading this type of book. And that may or may not work for everybody.
For everybody. Judy, did you have something?
Yeah, a couple of things came to mind. The back and forth was confusing to some extent, but I think that the immigrant experience is very confusing. And sometimes when you were in the present and you saw the behaviors and the relationship between the present characters, and then they went back, you saw what had happened in the lives of the grandparents and the great-grandparents, which made them the way that they were, and you could better understand the interrelationships. And
Yes.
You could understand Bo and Ma a little bit better because they were a product of the way they were brought up and their parents and their grandparents.
Absolutely. We'll talk about that in a lot of depth, but you're absolutely right. Yeah.
And Lynda, I just want to point out to you, I don't know if you saw that Beverly's hand is up and Jackie's hand is up.
Great. Go. Beverly?
Let's
Did
get
you have
Beverly
something?
Hi,
unmuted.
yes, I unmuted. Thank you for taking my response. I usually love every book that's been selected. I can't say I didn't like the book, but it was one of my least favorite. And I think although I admired her ability graphically, I mean, she's an incredible artist, I found that the simplicity took away from the story. I too, like some of the other speakers, said that to myself, why didn't they put some kind of a listing, a chronological listing of who's who? The names really confused me. I didn't know who, if she was talking about her brother, her father's father, her mother's father. And it really annoyed me. It almost diminished the heartache that they all went through because it was so simply done. And it didn't appeal to me that much. Not
Yeah.
so much the story as much as how it was done.
Right. You know what? I want to take this opportunity to, unless somebody else had a comment, Debbie, what Debbie and I did this morning is we pulled out, there were some images that were online and we just decided we're going to show you these images Debbie, you want to pull the first one up?
Lynda, may I real quick say something that goes
Yeah.
along with what you're saying? Just for
Sure.
everybody in the future, having worked at a bookstore, I've got a list here. You can go to a website called bookcompanion.com. And for many huge numbers of books, and this was one of them, they list all of the characters. So I agree with everybody. I found that a little confusing. So the first thing I did was I went and I made myself this list, and then I made notes in it too. So just in the future, if you have anything, bookcompanion.com. Thanks, Lynda.
Wow, thank you. Good, thank you. So take a look at this. Okay, so we're starting with this one. Okay. So what is this? If you remember, I'm going to just sort of refresh your memory. This was one of the most, led to one of the most poignant scenes for me. Do you remember? This is talking about Beau's father. Now remember, Beau is T's father, and this is about Beau's father. And this is one of his experiences during the war, when the French at this time, this was after the war, and then during, all of a sudden, the enemy comes, and Beau is the child in the arms of the adult, and they say, hold your breath, taking him underwater, and they're trying to take him to where there is a secure, like an underwater shelter for him. And you can see Beau's face holding onto the side there. Here is rice and water they give him. You wait until someone comes for you. Now, if you look at those colors, what's really interesting is that if you were to turn the page, which unfortunately I don't have the next one for you, but if you were to turn the page on that, what you would see is the darkest colors of all, the deep browns, almost the blacks, as well as the deep coral colors there. Because what is happening, it says, you wait here till someone comes for you. And then the next page says, above ground, the soldiers were burning houses, killing women and children. Underground, Beau waited. Looking up through the breathing hole was the only way to tell that it was night. And he waited, and then again, day, and then again, night, before someone came back. So you see the fear in his eyes and everything. And again, the colors, the shading, all of that. I found that really interesting, how that helped to tell the story. As opposed to the next ones, Debbie, take a look at the other one that we selected. The first one, Tracing Our Journey in Reverse. So what do you see in this one? What strikes you about this one? Any thoughts on this one?
Well, there's certainly sadness and despair. That's what I see in this. That's what I saw when I read it.
Right.
Stephanie.
And I thought
said-
loneliness too.
Loneliness, absolutely. Sadness.
Stephanie said distance.
Distance, yes, so much distance. And I love this because it's distance not only in the expanse of the ocean here, right? But this is the distance she now has to travel in terms of trying to get her parents to open up to her. She's trying to trace the journey in reverse over the ocean. To me, there's a wistfulness here. Yeah, all of the emotions that you see in this. Anything else? Or Debbie, you want to bring up the next one? And this is the adjoining page. So we did get the two of them together. Through the war, seeking an origin story that will set everything right. So how does this speak to you?
I think that the change between these two pictures is amazing. I mean, the other one was such a calm, and this is such a whirlwind.
I agree with Stephanie. She said turmoil. I agree 100%. I was going to say chaos.
Yeah.
Turmoil, chaos, tumultuous. This is the journey, right? This is the journey. What you're seeing here is an image of in reverse, but this is sort of the journey that they took escaping out of Vietnam. Remember how it's a scary, scary journey that they took out of Vietnam to get to the Malaysian refugee camp, how they sort of stole away. So you see this physical journey that was so tumultuous. And then to me, it was even more than that in a larger sense, not just the physical journey, but what else is this representing to you?
The emotional journey.
Such an emotional journey that these parents are going to have to go through in remembering and recounting their past. And for her to even try to understand what this origin story was. She's hoping that knowing that is going to set everything right. Any other thoughts? Okay, good. Just thought that would be kind of a fun thing to do for us, right? So moving on. So why did the author, do you think, why did she decide to do this as a graphic memoir? Why did she do it like that, do you think? Well, I'll start us out by telling you that she said in one of her interviews that I listened to that she actually started it as an oral history and it was so boring to her. It was so many words. And she decided she wanted to reach a larger audience and to make it more accessible. And so she decided a graphic novel was the way to go. Any other thoughts?
I was wondering if it was therapy for her as well.
Might have
Like
been.
an art therapy,
Absolutely.
to let
Sarah,
it out as a visual thing, not just as a written thing.
Right. Sarah, did you have your hand up? Yeah, unmute yourself.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I happen to love the power of words as well as anybody else. But the truth of the matter is, most of us remember the Vietnam War on this side of the ocean. And we didn't know much about the other side. I went to Vietnam, and you come away with a completely different perspective. And I think the history would have been boring is one word, tedious. The words are unfamiliar, the names of the cities and the trails and the characters and all that. It's very difficult to keep track of. And so I think for purposes of not just expediency, but I think for purposes for us to understand that her parents were mysteries to her until she decided to go back and see where it is that they come from. And that can affect all of us. I'm a child of immigrants. And so instead of telling us the historical details, she had that timeline, she had a graphic timeline. And even that was hard to follow, quite honestly.
Very hard to follow, yeah.
So I think it was in order to me, this book was twofold. It wasn't just a story of immigration. To me, it was a story of an adult woman trying to seek out some kind of a relationship with her adult parents. Absolutely. And to see why they were both damaged. Absolutely. And how they were damaged. And that once she recognized what those were, lead her to a greater understanding with her parents. Exactly. And to me, that's what I was drawn to. Right. So I liked the fact that it was a relatively quick read, but I still got that powerful image of a child, although she's an adult woman, she's a mother herself, seeking to know more about her own parents and where she came from. So I liked the idea, and it was different. So I enjoyed that too, of having the graphic.
Good. Well, I think the author would be really happy because I think you just hit on just about everything that she was really trying to accomplish in the story. So, by the way, welcome, Sarah. Sarah's new to the community and new to our book group. So we're glad to welcome you.
I also wanted to point out there are a couple good comments on similar thoughts. So Jackie had said that I think it touches many lives and many generations. Also, everyone has a backstory, and this makes hers haunting because it really does leave you with her exact image. Stephanie said maybe it was easier to do with art. And Sue pointed out reaching more age groups with her story. And Maxine said a picture is worth 1,000 words. So with that being said, you have a hand up also. And hopefully she'll tell us how to pronounce her name. Is that a last name, Anushka?
Let me see.
Anushka, did you have something?
Yes. Hi. Thank you for having me. Yes, you pronounced it perfectly.
Okay.
Actually, I was going to comment on when I finished reading this book, what I felt was a sense of her quest for a legacy for her child, because she came from, to a certain degree, from a lack of understanding for me of her parents as mysteries. So it humanizes the Vietnam War by understanding what happened behind the stereotypes that sometimes we have, but it also helps to explain the burden of that legacy for her child, so that he can understand what came before, and he can free himself from all that burden that they had before from Vietnam. I thought that was quite powerful, because at the end she actually sees her son as hopefully becoming free from
Yeah,
everything
very
that they
powerful.
came through. So it's a matter of legacy and understanding of that legacy. It's also a responsibility for whomever comes after that, it seems to me.
That's right.
Thank
So
you.
you guys are really touching upon an interesting thing, and that would lead us to the next question that I was thinking about is, so why do you think the book begins with her labor and delivery of the child? Did you think that was odd when you first read it before you kind of went further? I sort of did, like, I wonder where this is going. And then of course you kind of do get it, but why do you think that she did start out with this idea of labor and delivery?
Well, I was struck by that. And it's kind of like it's bookends. In the beginning, she is in labor. At the end, she's talking about how difficult it is to be a parent. She never had any concept of how hard it was for her mother. She was just struck with how in the world did her mother ever do all this?
How did you do it 6 times? She says to her mother, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but also I found it fascinating and understandable, her anger. At the end, she was just, there was one page where she was just so angry that, you know, she couldn't reach her parents and her mother especially like she wanted to. And then it just went on from there about her own parenting and how her love for her son. But it ended up, I think, having a tremendous respect for her mother and the fact that her mother lives with her.
Yes, that's very interesting, right? Knowing that, exactly. At one point, she even says, it's being both a parent and a child without acting like a child that eludes me. So she really is conflicted with this idea of being a mother and being a child, right? So she has that. What else do you see with that labor and delivery? Anything else about that you want to comment on?
Stephanie had pointed out that one changes when one gives birth. And
Yeah.
it would really make one look differently at one's own parents.
Absolutely. She talks about that, the whole idea about it's a very humbling physical experience when you're going through that. And of course, it does help her to bond with her mother. I loved this one part when she says she's with her mother, is in the room with her. And then her mother leaves at one point and she says, Ma leaves me, but I am not alone. And a terrifying thought comes into my head. Family is now something I have created and not just something I was born into. And you realize that this is really what's causing her to reflect so much on her own birth family now that she's going to be creating her own family. And it's actually, she realizes, a very terrifying responsibility, which I don't know that I thought about it when I gave birth, but it really is a very deep and responsible thought to have at that time. Any other thoughts about that? You know, the other thing I thought about with this labor and delivery, do you remember there was a scene in there while she's in labor, she looks at her through the curtain and she sees her roommate. She knows her roommate is really just coming back from going to the bathroom. She's getting into bed. But do you remember what she thinks she's seeing through the curtain? She thinks she sees death pushing a wheelbarrow of corpses. Like all of a sudden that image comes into her mind. And there's another story that she thinks about while she's in labor, I think, and it's about one that she had overheard her father telling about a rape, because now they're going to do a C-section on her, right? It's about a rape and a woman who has a scissors that's opened inside of her. She has this. So what does that make you think of? So to me, I think it was,
it makes me think of the war and what happened to Vietnam.
Right. And sort of the imagery that she's kind of inherited a little bit from the stories that she's overheard or whatever, right? So a little bit of that kind of showing up there. But the other thing, any other comments before I just share what I thought about that too? I thought it was powerful that she starts with that, especially because of her mother's experiences in giving birth. Here she is in this modern hospital. She has a husband by her side, a mother at her side, doctors that are pushing and pulling on her, right, and making and trying to get the baby out, and then finally having to do a surgery. But the whole idea is such a contrast to her mother's births that she had, whether it was in Saigon or in the refugee camp or wherever it was, right? It was such a different experience. So I thought that was interesting too, highlighting the differences.
Also, Lynda, her mother lost one child at least.
Two children, one born dead and one that died.
And I felt that was in her head also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lynda, Anushka pointed out, isn't labor also symbolic for the struggle of her experience, war, immigration, discovery, and eventually light and life, the themes in this book?
Yes, thank you. It is. And to her, the author says in one of the interviews that to her, she sees this whole thing as a circle, that the whole experience of immigration was a circle, and the whole experience of labor and life is certainly a circle. And so it was very appropriate to begin this story that way. What would you say is the meaning of the title, by the way? The best we could do. What's that referring to? Sarah, did you have your hand up? Yeah.
I think as parents, that pretty much sums it up. It's the best we can do. This book is about parenting. She becoming a parent to her son, her parents becoming parents during very difficult times, immigrating and adjusting to a completely new surrounding for her parents. She was 3, so she grew up American. But for her parents to come back after the war and everything and having to deal with what they had to deal with, I think in the end, she's kind of giving her parents a little slack. And she's saying, they did the best they could do. I got the sense that she had a bit of a tumultuous relationship with her parents. I think she was a little bit removed from mom, and dad it didn't seem like there was a whole lot until she started going to his background to understand his distance.
Right.
And not being really involved with the kids. So she had 2 damaged parents. Mom had a breakdown after the death of one of those kids. Dad was not a strong parent. And so I think she's kind of just summing it up. Like many families, they did the best they could.
Right. What else?
I also think, I also think that I agree with what Sarah said. I think that as an adult, the best thing you can do is when you're in your 40s and 50s and adulthood is to forgive yourself for all the things that you felt that you couldn't do, and you realize that you did the best you could do.
Yeah.
And that our parents, and I agree wholeheartedly, that is being able to forgive your parents for the supposed sins that they had committed by recognizing that they did the best that they could do with what they were given and what they had.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? For sure. So you're thinking the best we could do. What about the way it's used the first time in the story? We're looking at it in the one sense that I think she totally meant the best we could do, in a way of sort of forgiving at the end, as you bring out. In the story, if you remember when it's used, do you remember this? It's after the death, I think it was of Kuyen, the one that was born and was sick because she couldn't take, the mother-in-law said, don't give her the breast milk, give her carrot juice or something. Remember that? And so she's literally dying, and they end up taking her to the hospital. And if you remember, the doctors say, I'm sorry, it was the best we could do. Any thoughts about how that struck you at the time reading it?
I don't remember.
So as I read it, I felt like it was hollow, very hollow words told to her at that time. Because in the illustrations on the previous page, what it showed was she had gone to the hospital. She was standing in a long line waiting to be taken. And the nurses said to her, "We've got our hands full. You've got to wait." So in other words, it really wasn't the best they could have done. But they're saying it was the best they could do. So I thought it was, in that way, sort of hollow words, meant as an apology.
Lynda, Anushka has her hand up.
Yeah. Anushka, did you have something?
Sorry, I haven't used Zoom in a while, so I'm
I
still
know,
getting
yeah.
my way around that. So now that you mentioned that, the way I would think is kind of the best we could do. It's also about the kind of knowledge we have at a specific time that actually help us understand and make decisions. So the mother-in-law or the relatives actually told her about the carrot juice, but that's what they thought was best, right? Maybe the physicians at that time didn't know any better, just like her parents didn't know any better how to raise them. So the best you could do is not just the economic side, but also what you do with the knowledge you have and the understanding you have of things. Just
Yeah, it's the best you can do, operating with the facts that you have at that time. Exactly. Yeah.
And
Um,
Lynda,
yeah.
I think that as many have said, by her understanding the background of both her mother and her father, she was more sympathetic and realized that the reasons of why they did what they did, and that was the best that her parents could do in raising her and her siblings.
And again, coming to that realization finally at the end is where we see her, right? Where she's actually able to kind of
Right.
forgive them and realize the best we could do.
And Jackie also just said, don't you think as we age through the years, we really do see life and our parents with a different and probably more real light, and certainly a more fair light?
Yes. And with a certain amount of forgiveness where that was necessary, right? Is that what you're saying, Jackie? Yeah.
And Lynda, isn't there a towel that says, "I've now become my mother"?
Yes, as we've become more like them, we have to forgive them, right? Okay,
Yes.
that's a good point.
Yes.
So we're talking a lot about Bo, and we're talking a lot about about T's parents. So let's back up and let's look at it like she does. She says in the book, "To understand how my father became the way he was, I had to learn what happened to him as a little boy. It took a long time to learn the right questions to ask." Let's talk about Bo's own childhood. How did that affect him? I mean, we're going to talk in a second. We'll talk about how he was as a father, how he was as a man, but let's talk about him in his boyhood. We saw that one picture of him right in the very beginning where he was, hold your breath and taken underwater in order to get him to a little bit of safety, where he's now watching all of this burning and shooting and killing of this by the soldiers above him in that one illustration we showed. What do we know about Bo? Generally speaking, as a child, what would you say about him? Any thoughts? Yeah.
I thought he had a really difficult childhood. That's one of the things I wrote down. It was such a hard childhood to watch his father cheat, abuse, and then kick his mother out. And
Yes.
then he went to North Vietnam. So, I mean, such a very different thing from what the average child would have been
Right.
through.
So he had a very traumatic childhood, didn't he? Yeah. What else? He's abandoned by his father later, right? His father abandons him. He's raised really by the grandfather. So what we see with him is he suffers through all of these different times with these different wars and he's all these different battles that he's a child and he's witnessing all of this. He knows that his father has disappeared to join the Viet Minh revolutionaries. He's hungry a lot of times as a child. So I think that, yeah.
Lynda?
Yeah.
Every male role model for Bo is a disaster. His
Exactly.
father is a disaster. His grandfather his grandfather took care of him, but he was horrible to his wife, a chronic cheater. There wasn't one solid male role model that he had. So it's certain, aside from the environment which he found himself anyway. So it's no wonder that he grew up to be as distant and as incapable of relating to his children or his wife.
Exactly. In fact, what I love is that after telling T his story, exactly like we're remembering it here, he says, now, after telling the story of his child, he said, now you know what it was, how it was for me, and why later I wouldn't be normal.
Yeah.
He actually says that to her. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then how does he become as a father? How do we know him as a man? What do we know about him? What do we know about him? Well, he's distant from the kids. He has explosions of anger. What else about him?
He allows them to do whatever they want. He's the
They can stay
caregiver.
up, they watch The Exorcist. Right.
The wife
Whatever they
goes to work. He's the caregiver, and there's no rules. It's complete hefker, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, there's just a lot of darkness, right? What else?
Also, Lynda,
Anything else?
I was struck with how sad it was when the author wanted her Dr. Seuss books
Yes.
and some of her toys, and he just also, you don't need those anymore.
Yeah.
Just gets rid of them. I mean, the guy is really warped.
Yeah, totally warped. In fact, what we see is that Teef says finally she had to grow up and go away to stop being scared of him. So that's really something to say, right? About your father. As opposed to Ma, let's talk about her childhood. What was the contrast there? Do you remember Ma? She kind of, I'll start us off, grew up sort of in the lap of luxury in comparison to Bo. Her father was an engineer, right? She grew up in Cambodia in the very beginning. Ma's mother was very elegant. Do you remember this story and all those illustrations about the mother? The mother, there's a great one where she's sort of reclining and Ma, as a little girl, comes up to her mother, and you could see in the illustration, she's trying to crawl onto her mother, and her mother is pushing her away because she's very distant, very cold, very elegant, beautiful, entertaining. But the servants can't stand the mother. So we see what she's like. And of course, that makes Ma a very special person in a way, because she ends up turning to her books. Remember that? Becoming a wonderful student. What else about Ma? It was funny because Bo says the happiest time in his life was when he met Ma. And what does Ma say about that? That's not how she feels, right? For Ma, the happiest time in her life was when she was still in school, before she met him.
Right.
Later, she tells T, she says, you know what? He monopolized me. And that was the end of her fun, was when she got involved with him. And of course, she never wanted to speak about it, but what does Ma notice? What does T know? Why did they get married? You remember that? All of a sudden, T realized.
She was pregnant.
She was pregnant. Yeah, the months didn't add up. Exactly. And I love the idea that Ma says that actually she married him because she thought he had TB and she wanted to make the last of his years happy. So she married him thinking that in a very short time she would be free as a widow. And the bad news was he got better, right?
And didn't Ma say that her mother did not like him?
No.
Did not.
And what was the effect of that, Judy? What was the effect of that?
She wanted him more because the mother said no.
That's right. She rebelled, and the mother said no. She said yes. The stronger the mother was, the more strong that attraction was to him. Exactly.
The old story. The old
story.
death, right?
Yes.
I just wanted to. Jackie had her hand up, so I don't know if she still had a comment to make.
I was just going to say, but I don't know what page it's on. That's one of the visuals that I absolutely loved in the book. It's the two parents, and you can see he looks happy, kind of skippy-go-lucky, like he's not even involved. And the look on her face, if looks could kill, I loved that page.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I did love that part about, and I also like words much more than the art. I respond to that much more, but I did love a lot of, there were certain ones that were very poignant to me, those illustrations. What do we know about Ma then? As so now we know her childhood. So now what can we say about Ma? What do we know about her? Well, we know that she wanted to be a doctor and she had all these big dreams of leaving Vietnam, and she ends up saddled with this marriage, disappointed in this marriage. What else do we know about her?
Well, she's very driven to succeed in her studies and in a career, and she really stands up for herself. You know, you wouldn't let her drive and to classes, and she figures out how to work that system and strategizes.
Exactly. She's very competent, isn't she? What else?
Yes, very, very bright.
Yeah.
I find it interesting for the woman who didn't want children that she had quite so many, and that she was so dramatically affected by, for example, the death of the firstborn, that she continued to have children during the worst of times. She was literally laboring on the ground.
Yeah.
And yet she wasn't exactly able to show a lot of emotion.
I love the way she says it. T describes it. She says, with my mother, the words I love you sticks in her throat. She just couldn't say those words, right? She just couldn't get them out. In the same way that Bo never went to the awards assemblies when these girls were getting all kinds of high honors. And somebody says, how come your husband doesn't go to the awards assemblies? And she says, it's not our way, which really sums up also that whole idea of not showing emotion, mother, and also, of course, Bo. She's extremely competent, Ma, and we see that in a lot of different ways. I love that part about how even when they went, where was it? The airplane. So now they get on they're done with the refugee center, and now they're able to come and seek asylum here in the States. So they have to fly out. So they get to the airport and they say, does anyone know English? And the next thing you know, what's happening? Ma is directing everybody to their flights, to the point that she's almost missing her own. But the truth is, she's like all of a sudden in charge. And the same thing happens when they change flights. I don't remember if it was in Chicago or wherever. She's the one in charge. And you see her competency in every single way. And certainly she brings order to those times, but also to their own lives. She's really the one, right? What else? Anything else? Why do you think they spent so much time talking about the births of the children? Any thoughts on that? I thought it just made her all the more heroic. You just see how really amazing she was. The fact that she endured and survived all of that. And
But
again,
sorry, Lynda.
I was going to say, just again, the contrast. Yeah. Pardon?
I wondered if she wanted those children, or
what would be your guess?
I don't know. I think she didn't know birth control. I think that she might have just happened.
I would say you're right. I would say she probably didn't know or have or whatever birth control, and it would just happen, because I can't imagine that this would have been totally voluntary that way. I don't know. Any other thoughts about Ma? Because I think she's really amazing when she gets back to California and she makes a home for them. I love the way T says, you know, immediately she got minimum wage, but she saved her money, she sacrificed, and the next thing you knew, she was off welfare, and she had started out on the assembly line wherever she was working, and the next thing you know, she's getting her certification in mechanical drawing. So she really is driven and very, very accomplished. But without question, both of these parents were so affected by the Vietnam War. Do you remember any of the specific things about that? I mean, that was really painful. And when we see these movies about Vietnam, one of the reasons I think that T was driven to write this book, as a matter of fact, she says she was so angry to see the Vietnam War and that whole period of time depicted in such negative ways. she had a lot of rage in her about that, especially when she was a student in New York and heard how people were talking about Vietnam. Because it wasn't taking into consideration the people that lived there, the people that weren't Viet Cong, the people that weren't soldiers and killers. In fact, they were people just trying to live their lives, such as her parents were. And I thought it was an interesting part about when the Northern government won after liberation, Bo was considered Nguy, Nguy. Remember that? Which means deceitful, or they didn't trust him. He was fired from his teaching job. Currency was changed. They lost all their money. She's now 8 months pregnant. They're desperate to escape, and escape they do when she's, of course, 8 months pregnant at that point. So you see that they were continually displaced throughout the war. They were living in the Mekong Delta, and then the Americans came in. They quickly changed and they went to Saigon. They just kept moving locations. They were continually displaced by war. And of course, what are the effects on the children? What are the effects on the parents? And we see that. Let's talk about T herself. So what do we know about her, about T? Well, we know she's struggling to develop a relationship with her parents. What else do we know about her? She's close with her siblings. She takes great pride in her sister's accomplishments. They're real overachievers. She remembers a lot of darkness in her childhood. Yeah, Sarah, you got your hand up? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that she married a Caucasian named Travis. I think that was pretty telling. I'm not sure what. Was she escaping her heritage? I don't know. I just thought it was very interesting. It's not addressed, but.
Right. Well, she's Americanized, right? She becomes American.
Yeah, well, she's Americanized. The difference is that her appearance will still she can't really blend into society the way other ethnicities because of her appearance. So she may be American, but she still has some, there's some real fallout by that. And yet she chose not to select somebody from a similar background. And we don't know much about Travis at all. I mean, he's totally in the background, just mentioned as the boy's father, and that's it.
We have a sense, though, that he's a pretty good husband. He's there for the birth, and she tells him how wonderful he is. I think I kind of, when I was rereading it, you're right, he's so much in the background, but I got a positive feeling about that relationship, the way she was feeling about him, the marriage that they had built together. But again,
Also,
it's very sketchy. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Also, he was so helpful in trying to, help her with the breastfeeding, and
yes,
he was very much a loving parent to their newborn.
Right. I thought T was very interesting because she was so conflicted. She wanted to raise her son with family, but I love this line when she says she realizes that proximity isn't the same as closeness. And she's wondering, how was it that they all could live so close to each other and yet be so far apart, right? And she's got a lot of guilt in her. Did you guys recognize that? A lot of guilt in her. She says she knows that her parents escaped on a boat so the children could grow up and win their freedom. She knows she should be more grateful. But to her, it's like a symbol of two sides of a chasm that's got a lot of meaning, a lot of resentment, as well as, but she knows she should be grateful. It's problematic for her. It's definitely a conflict. Any other thoughts about her? She very much felt, Sarah, as you point out, that sense of being the other, looking different. And she talks about that when she was living in San Diego. Can you imagine? It was a naval marine base there, and it was after the Vietnam War. So there was a lot of that stupid gook feeling, that went on, bad name calling and all of that. Anything else that you want to talk about with T?
Stephanie has her hand raised.
Yeah, don't all jump down my throat, but it's almost like being a child of survivors. That guilt that comes with knowing somehow that your parents went through something horrendous, and that you're supposed to be grateful, and you're supposed to, it just seems to be a reminder. And as I say, don't jump down my throat.
Stephanie, I thought about that throughout the entire reading of the book. Did the rest of you nod yes or no? Did the rest of you think about that?
I agree with that too. It's kind of like
Yeah.
you're leading a fairly normal life and you were very little when all this happened to you, but they went through a horrendous situation that they lived day after day after day, really. And you don't. You want to move on.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah. Sue, did you have your hand up?
Yes. I had to get unmuted.
Yeah.
I was thinking of that too before when you were talking about things. I think that people who have a difficult childhood growing up often don't want to talk about it with their children. And so therefore they hide it. It's kind of a protection mechanism for them.
Yes.
Because then they don't have to relive it by telling it to the other family members. And so I think that was kind of the reason she didn't know as much about what her parents were like and what they went through exactly until she really pushed the envelope to do this book.
And it was painful for them and it was hard for her, right?
Right.
Very
Yeah.
hard. She keeps trying, but I have to find the right questions because her mother is very, wants to only buy her gifts and take her shopping and, you know, wants to plan dinner, does not want to talk about the past. And of course, her father, we know for him, it's, that expression was so painful that it was, for him, the questioning was opening wound beneath wound. You could just picture how painful that was.
I think we don't really ask our parents enough questions when we have the opportunity. I found that in my case, and we didn't go through that kind of an experience, obviously, but you have so many more questions as you get older about your family and what they went through and how they grew up that you don't think about as a younger person to ask. So she at least got going on it.
Yes, she did. And again, that all goes back with this whole idea of the best we could do. You know, you look back on it and realize they did the best they could do. And we're sorry we didn't ask more questions to find out a little bit more about that. Right. And she has no idea. She's saying, I don't know how to be close to them because what did she see growing up? Her parents' relationship with the grandparents was kind of non-existent too, in terms of, she says she learned how to pour tea and buy gifts. That was the relationship that they had. So T tells us she was very affected by her parents' trauma. How so? How so? So I'll start us out in the discussion, but she says, more than any other piece of Vietnamese culture, my inheritance is the inexplicable need and extraordinary ability to run when the shit hits the fan, my refugee reflex. Remember when there's all of a sudden like a fire in one of their apartment buildings? And what does she do? She knows exactly what to do. She grabs the brown folder that has all their documents in it, right? That's what her father and mother had taught her, always have those documents handy. She grabs that and evacuate. She runs out. It's like what she'd been trained her whole life to do. She actually did. So she knows that's part of her DNA. She says, how much of me is my own and how much is stamped into my blood and bone predestined? So she's wondering herself how much of that is in her, which brings us back to a few of the comments you guys made in the beginning, which is her fear. Is she going to be turning that same stuff over to her son? Is she passing that on? And then she says on another occasion, maybe being their child simply means that I will always feel the weight of their past. By the way, those of you that are children of survivors of the Holocaust, I would think that would ring very true to you. Maybe being their child simply means that I will always feel the weight of their past. From my friends, that's what I've heard would be something that rings true for them as well.
Well, for me, I'm a child of survivors of the Holocaust, and there's many different reactions, but I think that there were a lot of similarities as I was reading the book, not really wanting to know when you're younger about your parents' history. their reluctance to talk about it, but you as a child not really wanting to hear it. And then, of course, when you do want to hear it, more often than not, they're elderly or they're gone. So
Right.
there's a sense of guilt about that too, but also the sense that even when they're safe and they were already in America, they had the fear that it could happen again. And so that altered the way they raised us. And then, of course, we internalize that and don't realize it, but we've passed that on the way we raise our own kids. So the sense of being an immigrant and a fear of having to run or being unsafe, it's obviously diluted. We're not faced with the Nazis, but still it's that same fear. And I guess that she's also innately inherits that.
She does. And she says, they passed on wonderful lessons, respect each other, take care of each other. They passed on good lessons, study hard, work hard, do well. But the other part was the education, but
is paramount.
Paramount. And the other part is lock the door. There's always that little bit of paranoia that's there. Lock the door. So yeah, that's part of what they've got too. She's also affected, by the way, by the mothers having lost those babies. I thought this was it was impactful to her. She says, how do other children compare? She says, how do parents get over the loss of a child? Don't they wonder, how do other children compare to the lost one? And this is what she wonders. Have our parents ever looked at us and felt slightly disappointed? After all, they must have had such high hopes, so much possibility to fall short. So she's even growing up with this feeling of having been impacted by the fact that her parents had lost these two babies. So this is sort of what she was like. I do want to talk about the fact that at the end, of course, we see great changes in her. How would you say that she changed? Obviously, we said her relationship with her parents. How has that changed? The relationship with her parents.
Well, I think we talked about she's more forgiving and more open with them and more curious too. Honestly curious, not just what she thought she saw curious.
Right. And she says she comes to realize being their child simply means I will feel the weight of their past. Nothing that happened makes me special, but my life is a gift that is too great a debt I can never repay. So she really comes to realize the gift that she's gotten in her life. Anything else about the ending? I thought that was very poignant.
Well, what you just read also just reinforces her deep sense of guilt and responsibility towards the future. But I keep thinking about Travis and her choice. And I think my sense is that he's a very loving person, and that he is her buffer, and just he helps her acclimate to this life here, whereas perhaps a Vietnamese husband could not. And maybe that's one reason she fell in love with him.
Kathy, that's such a good point. In other words, a Vietnamese husband would have had perhaps the same insecurities, the same concerns that she had, as opposed to the Americanization that she did get with this husband. Yeah.
And I just want to say one thing, that I was talking just last night to a very dear friend of mine who married a Vietnamese woman and had 2 children. They're no longer married. And he was saying that they recently were together with his present wife. And he was saying how complex the family is, the Vietnamese family is. And the dynamics are so perplexing. And they want, they are always looking for ways to have him and his wife help them financially. And they're just, he just said there's just a lot of complexities. Yeah. And I never really thought of that. And they get along very, very well. Yeah. But there are many dynamics, cultural dynamics, that are always there for him.
And it's interesting because from the outside, she says, look at it, they look like they're so close. Everybody lives near each other. All the siblings live together, but underneath it all, there is an undercurrent. But that's probably, to a certain extent, that might be true with a lot of families, right? Where everything
for sure. One
way, yeah. The other thing that I thought was so interesting about the end with nursing and the jaundice, the baby has jaundice, and she says, I love this line. There were so many things I did not know about being a parent until I became one. Isn't that the truth? It's so true. But she says when her son had jaundice, remember this, she had to nurse him at like 90-minute intervals, 20 minutes times. And all of a sudden she understood her parents. Why? Because no matter how much her body wanted to rest, there was one simple and clear directive. And what was it? Keep him alive. And therefore she dragged herself over to the hospital, right? From the room across the street that they had rented. And she showed up there and she did that nursing. It was the breast milk that kept him alive, of course. And of course, I couldn't help but remember the irony of Kuyen's death. Remember the baby's death? Because she did not have that breast milk and in fact was given that carrot juice. Yeah, Jillian, did you have something?
Yes, there was some humor in the whole jaundice setup. I didn't know about jaundice. What does he mean our baby is yellow? He's half Asian. I thought that was very funny. I mean, we Jewish mothers all know about jaundice just because a bris is delayed if a baby has jaundice. The baby turns yellow.
That's right.
And the moel, the person who performs the circumcision, can't do it if the baby has jaundice. So we all know about the bilirubin levels and the blue lights. And I don't know if your son Daniel had it, but one of my sons had it, and we might have had to postpone the bris, and we had to have the blue lights, put him in the sun.
We did the same exact thing with our son. Exactly. We're monitoring the bilirubin level. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So most parents don't know that unless you have to do that.
Right.
But I just thought that was funny because he's half Asian, that they thought it was normal that he was yellow.
Right.
So,
right.
But yeah, it was definitely an interesting book. I mean, because the only things about Vietnam I ever learned was watching seeing the Broadway show Miss Saigon and watching the movies, the Vietnam, very violent movies, but you never heard.
And she's saying that so much of that is really just the wrong depiction. And by the way, in one of the interviews that I listened to, what was interesting was she's talking about Walter Cronkite, and he was giving a voiceover to some scenes of total destruction and fighting and the aftermath of all this fighting in the streets, in these alleyways of New York. And he says, and these streets, they are like a chessboard. Remember this in the book? There was a diagram of an illustration of a chessboard. This is like the Lower East Side. This is where there's a lot of poor slums. And it's all the criminal element that live there. Turns out that's exactly where she grew up. That's where her family all lived. So they weren't the criminal element. They were the normal, nice people that were living there. And we never heard about them. We only heard about all these other things. And she talks about the fact that Vietnamese women were considered, what did we know of them? They were hookers. They were bar girls. The children were begging in the streets. We had such stereotypes. And the author says, that really was something that was so disdainful to her, to the point that in another interview she mentioned, she has been offered the possibility of making a movie of her life, of her parents' life. And you know what? She's turned it down. She says she doesn't trust Hollywood, the way that they are going to go ahead and portray the Vietnamese. They still are doing it in a negative way. And so she doesn't want to be any part of it. No. Just to finish up a little bit, because I loved also at the end, she feels very heroic at the end. Why? She says the first week of her baby's life was the hardest thing she had ever had to go through, the only time she ever had the feeling of being heroic. So to me, the contrast was so dramatic that was the baby's first week of life was the hardest thing she'd ever gone through. That made her heroic. When you think about everything that her mother had gone through, the contrast was so, to me, very, very dramatic. But having a child teaches her that she's no longer the center of the universe, she says. She was able to slip herself into her mother's shoes. And she finally comes to realize that she's got to let go of the anger that she has. But at 40 years old, she's still got a lot of that anger that she's trying to let go of.
Lynda?
Yeah.
That's why I just looked at the last 2 pages.
Yeah.
and it kind of sums it up. But when I look at my son, now 10 years old, I don't see war or loss or even Travis and me. I see a new life bound with mine quite by coincidence. And I think maybe he can be free.
Yeah.
It says it all. That finally, she's feeling that that can be true. And you used the word diluted, Sarah, before when you were saying that it gets diluted through the generations a little bit.
Yeah.
That's what she's hoping for. Janie, did you have something?
Yeah, I just was taken with that this whole story was was happening with the backdrop of the actual war, which really made them they were heroes in many ways, these normal families, this everyday situation where you're living in war. I mean, that's the backdrop reality. And that's what I was thinking about a lot as reading this.
Right. As a matter of fact, she tells one of the reasons she liked doing this as a graphic novel, she was able to do the history in the background and the personal story of her parents in the foreground. So that's interesting when you go back and look at the book. So just to close us up here in time-wise, what do you think is the author's takeaway message here altogether? We've talked about a lot about this experience that she had growing up with these parents. What would you say the author's takeaway message is here?
Be more accepting, because you never know what is really deep within.
Yeah. Absolutely. To have a more positive look at everything instead of seeing the negative, see the positive. What else?
Well, I think also that hindsight is so much easier. And so to add on to what you said, Judy, it's not just the positive, it's that you need to be fair. There's so many more sides to every story than just one or two.
Absolutely. What I think she wants us to take away, she says, is that this is one story about one person and one family from one country. There's so many stories today that are similar. And she talks about the fact that you look at the Serbians and you look at all of these different, she enumerates in her interviews all of these countries that are having these different problems and wanting to immigrate. She says, we must not think of immigrants today as numbers. And we do. We talk about how many are coming across the border, how many are getting in. Or she says we've got to look at them as individuals with names, with their own individual families and stories. We have to be able to empathize, which is sort of what Judy was saying, the idea of empathizing. And rather than seeing the differences in them, between them and us, we've got to see the humanity that connects us. So I think that really is her takeaway message. By the way, it's interesting because in a way, that message is really the message we wound up with after American Dirt. Those of you that were together when we all discussed that book, remember that one? Which was the Mexican experience, also the immigrant story.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts that you have that you want to share that we haven't hit upon? No? Okay, so
I would, Lynda, I put in the chat that honestly, I really did love this book pick because it was so very different. I thought it was haunting, but beautifully done artistically. And I think what you just said makes it even more so. Everybody's got a backstory, and yet by the way she presented it, it was something I didn't want to put down. And yet I really wanted to pass on to somebody else because they've just got to read it. And yet I don't want to give it away because it's beautiful. And I think that says a lot about it.
It does. One of the things it says on the cover, I think it says here that this is a book to break your heart and heal it. Because it's interesting, when I first read this story, I read it twice. When I first read it, it didn't have the same impact on me as it did the second go round. Anybody else have that experience? I guess I was sort of trying to look at the text, look at the pictures, look at the illustrations. I don't know. But when I went back and read it slowly, because I did read it very quickly at first, when I went back and read it slowly and really looked at the illustrations and read the text, I was really that much more moved by the story. One of the things about graphic novels that they're saying is what people like about them is that they are a quick read, which they can be. But when you really take the time to read it and really analyze what you're looking at and what you're reading, you're comprehending it the same way as you would comprehend text, because you are analyzing. The difference is you're analyzing the illustration as well as the text.
Thank you for that, Lynda. I think that was very helpful. Maybe it will encourage many of us to read it again, because I think one of the reasons I was left not feeling what you're describing is because I read it too fast.
Yeah. When you go back and look at it, you're going to have, I think you're going to end up having a different feeling. And I see a lot of you nodding your heads, those of you that did take a look at it or read it a little slower than I did the first go round. Okay, any other comments anyone wants to share?
I think we have to wrap up, Lynn, because it's almost 5 to 3 and we have sorry to say.
So let me just wrap it up by saying, once again, it is wonderful being with all of you, and thank you all for reading this book and enjoying something different. I think you're going to love our next month's book, and I'm already looking forward to seeing you again next month.
And I just want to say a big thank you, Lynda, for always being able to focus us on the beauty within the book, because we may not always love the story or the characters or whatever, but just listening to you every month, like you're able to us to see it from another light. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you. So sweet. Okay, great to see you guys. Be well, everybody. Stay safe.
Healthy.
We
will continue. We are continuing online for the next couple months as far as we know. So if it changes, we will let you know. But at this point, please go ahead and register on the JCC website. If you want anybody to be able to see this recording, either send me an email, or the Sterling Road Library, the Friends of Sterling Road Library newsletter does have the links. Right. So that's also available for you. But thank you all for being here. We look forward to this every month. Thank you to the Friends of the Sterling Road Library for being our partners and making this happen. And most of all, Lynda, thank you for taking the time to really delve in and have us all enjoy with you.
And thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much. Okay, everybody. Love seeing
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.